All right, so this section is really about, one of the outputs of this meeting was a civil society, Caribbean-based statement on our priorities that we would be pushing for the high-level meeting. In December, we attended the second Global NCD Forum hosted by the NCD Alliance. And at that meeting, they launched their global priorities, which Katie would have talked about yesterday. And these are priorities that are, they're global priorities, but they're priorities that can be used by regional alliances such as the HCC and national alliances to inform our agenda and to assist us as we move forward in this process. So what we've done is we've said, well, we have these goals, and then we have these 6 priorities, and we can go through them again. And we would like to use these priorities in the region, but we want to consult with our members to ensure that they are in agreement around these priorities. There's consensus. So you all should have received an email with a survey link asking you to go to a quick Google survey and just complete a questionnaire which said, you know, these are the priorities that NCD Alliance has set out, and here are a few additional priorities that we've come up with. And let us know in order of importance which you think are the most important. So do I need to go through these 6? I mean, I know Katie touched on them yesterday. I mean, I'll say them very quickly. First and foremost, put people first. This is around engaging the community of people living with NCDs, those caring for people with NCDs, and those just broadly affected by NCDs, and really making sure that they're at the center of everything that we do. Boosting NCD investment, that's been a cross-cutting theme throughout the past 2 days, so incredibly important. Stepping up action on childhood obesity. For HCC, this is an issue which is near and dear to our heart, so this is something that we feel is a critical priority, and the heads have also established this as a priority, the heads in this region. Adopting smart fiscal policies that promote health, and we've talked about this as well. And saving lives through equitable access to NCD treatment and universal health coverage, and then improving accountability. And accountability is really important for us as civil society organizations. That links into our watchdog role and ensuring that the data out there is there and able to help us with that accountability role. So in essence, we said these are the 6 priorities that NCD Alliance has proposed. These are the priorities that we are supportive of. What do you think? So we had 62 people respond, in essence around 27% of those who the survey was sent to. And I just want to say here that earlier Kenneth said that HCC should take the lead on this, and you know, we should take the lead on communicating and pushing this agenda. But we can only do as much, we can only do so much if we need your feedback. We need consultation. We need people to respond when we send out questionnaires asking for feedback. We need you to be engaged, and I think that's happening. But so when you see this number 62, it seems great, but then we see it's only 27% of those that we sent the questionnaire to. So we need everyone to be engaged so that we can indeed say this reflects the voice of our membership. 50% of those who responded were civil society actors. The rest were a mix of either academia, public sector, or private sector. 17 Caribbean islands were represented. 50% of the people identified themselves as people living with NCDs or caring for someone with NCDs. 78% were aware of the high-level meeting prior to the survey, and 92% of them said the survey was important to them. So these are the additional 4 priorities that we added. So in addition to these 6 on the left that NCD Alliance had, we said we know that heads have committed to a smoke-free zone in the Caribbean. This is another option. Let's include that. We know that we are a region that is going to be increasingly vulnerable to these natural disasters. Let's include a priority which speaks to this, making sure that our systems are resilient and able to respond to these natural disasters. We know that we've been committed to this multi-sectoral response through national NCD commissions called for in 2007. And so why don't we include a priority around strengthening these platforms? And finally, we are a perfect incubator in our countries, the small populations, to really leverage resources and eradicate cervical cancer. And I've heard this over and over again. I've heard it from heads. I heard it from the former Minister of Health right here in Jamaica. Talk about how can we do this? And then American Heart Association, Cancer Society said the same thing. We could do this in the Caribbean. So we added this as a final option. So you probably can't read the text here, but the upshot is that the top priorities in terms of feedback were the NCD Alliance priorities. So there was consensus that these 6 priorities posed by the NCD Alliance were in fact the top priorities from you all who fed back to us. Number 7 on the list, if you scroll down a bit there for me, was around the post-disaster settings. And then NCD commissions came in at number 8, 9 was around the smoke-free zone, and 10 was eradicating cervical cancer. So I think where we are at now, if anyone doesn't disagree strongly in the room, is that this is kind of the order or the sequence of priorities that we'll move ahead with. The problem that we've always had, one of my PAHO colleagues said this to me when I first started working in the HCC years ago. She said there's an implementation deficit in the Caribbean because Caribbean people have a problem with prioritization. And so what we need to do now is decide, are we going to push for all 10, or are we going to say, well, let's stick with the 6 priorities that are posed by the NCD Alliance and focus on those over the next few months. So does anyone have any particular feedback on that point right there in terms of priorities? Nicole, stick with the 6. Anyone disagree or agree strongly?
I agree with sticking with the 6, but I think number 7 has a strong, especially, although the way it's phrased there, climate change is at the end of a sentence. I think based on what we've been hearing, that climate change post-disaster is something.
So we've got for 7 here.
I agree with the last speaker, because post-disaster health response systems, those resilient health centers that were built prior to Hurricane Maria, they were there to respond to the needs after Maria. So I think that should be a priority.
Dr. Providence.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question. What would be the most easily achievable of all those objectives? In my mind, eradication of cervical cancer would be the most easily achievable.
Dr. Seeley and then Professor Santos.
Thanks, Maisha. I usually actually only go with 5 priorities, because I think that's why God gave you 5 fingers and 5 toes on one hand from a planning standpoint. But I wanted to bring to the attention that, in fact, I think it's on WHO is going to launch a global eradication of cancer of the cervix in May. So it's something that is doable, and it's something that's important to us in the region. So I want to suggest that we consider, in fact, 6 into 8. I would bring up the cancer of the cervix, and I agree with the post-disaster resilience one. So I end up with 8.
I don't have a suggestion about which ones we should have, but I'm going to be even more radical than Karen, and I'm thinking 3 or 4. I know you don't like to take things off priority list, but the problem with trying to do too much is that you don't do anything. So if you choose 3 or 4 that are achievable, including perhaps cervical cancer, because it's definitely achievable, there's some momentum going on that now. But we cannot do everything, people, I'm sorry, but we can't do everything.
So I think it's great to say that we should have 3 or 4, which I think we would agree with. Ideally, you want to have which ones are you going to cut out? I guess because I'd be tasked with the cutting out, so. Yeah, you can't read some of these. So let's move back to this slide, which will make it easier. Putting people first. This is easier to see? Oh. I'm going back. I'm trying to click. Oh. No, it's not the order, but I'm not sure people can read it. Can you read this though?
I think as I'm hearing someone say that as you look at this, there are perhaps about 2 or 3 that are cross-cutting. And whereas there are others that are very specific, and perhaps that is how we might approach it. So for example, I think the first 2, the whole issue of financing, that's cross-cutting. And so for me, that, you know, that would be one that would remain. But then there are some very specific, such as the eradication of cervical cancer, or the post-tragic disasters. So I think perhaps if we looked at it in that kind of a way, we may find that we get closer to what I think we're aiming for. Just a thought. So if you approached it like that, Maisha, what would you actually come up with as your cross-cutting and then your specifics? Address it like that. Let's see. Any
other thoughts?
Comments?
So that's cross-cutting then.
Exactly, that's cross-cutting.
Okay, we can consolidate fiscal policies and financing. Katie, is there a reason why NCD Alliance separated the two? Fiscal policies and financing?
Yeah, we decided, well, at one point there was a discussion around should we include fiscal policies under NCD financing. The reason why we didn't do it was because we were actually thinking about fiscal policies as an intervention, i.e. the focus on reducing consumption, rather than it actually being necessarily, yes, it raises domestic resources, obviously, but primarily we were thinking about it from a prevention, reduced consumption perspective. Just you know, just kind of throwing my views in as well. I mean, I think it's always very difficult to kind of focus it down, as we found it extremely difficult at the global level to come to six priorities. One thing I guess just to be a bit cautious of is kind of thinking about them as cross-cutting, is that I find sometimes you just lose the focus by saying it's cross-cutting. And I agree that whilst financing could be seen as a cross-cutting issue, I think we've seen over the years that by not focusing specifically on it, we've seen very little traction on it. So just kind of a word of caution. But it sounds like there are some very specific Caribbean issues that you need to be bringing in to our more global ones, which was the whole idea of it. So thanks.
No, thanks. Maisha, just a quick comment. So not speaking now specifically to the priorities per se, but just to remind persons, or when we're thinking about it, that we need to remember what the purpose. And the purpose, if I recall, is that this is what we want. We're using this as elements that we need to see in the outcome document.
That's exactly right.
From heads. So this is not to say if we don't see this, it means it's not important to us, or if we don't see this, it means we're not going to take action on it. So we have to look at it from that perspective as well, in terms of what is the purpose behind identifying these priorities. And Ambassador Rattray was saying, the processes that, you're going to negotiate tax and stuff like that. And so what we're saying is, as a civil society, as a group, these are the key elements that we would want to see some sort of language on. Because, it is really important to highlight these aspects in particular within the framework of saying, because remember, this is a global meeting. So it's a global high-level meeting. So we're addressing NCDs at that level.
Yeah, I think it's, thank you very much, Nicole. For a moment, I lost the focus on that it was in fact for the high-level meeting, and which is in fact the broad, it will in fact then be covering four 3, 14, 15, 16, 17, 4 years, 3 to 4 years. These priorities are 4, because the next high-level meeting won't be until 3 to 4 years. So that in that sense, because of that, in that context, there is no, I don't see a reason, in fact, to reduce the number. What might help is to prioritize among those, so those negotiating will know where they can give and take, because we have priorities for the Caribbean.
So yes, to follow up on Karen's point here, the 6 points have been made by NCD Alliance and you're taking that forward. I mean, so yeah, with support, of course. The question now is, are there some additional points that we also want to put in there? Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, Ambassador Rattray, if you have any comment on this, since you're the one with the most experience in negotiating these documents.
I think that we have to be a bit careful about putting forward too many positions. So I think we should highlight those that are key, because when you're going to the G77, and I mean, Jamaica is coordinating for CARICOM, so it would be, we will be the spokesperson. So you go into a room, you have 136 countries in there, determining what our position is as developing countries. So we will put forward something as what CARICOM wants to see. But you don't want to go in there with 10, 11, 12 different things. You really want to keep it focused. So that's what I would say. I'm not putting a hard limitation on it, but sometimes, you know, the G77 has traditionally deferred to CARICOM. They have recognized that we've played a leadership role on this. So traditionally, when we speak in the G77 as CARICOM, they listen to what we say. In recent years, we haven't been as active, and new countries have emerged. I'm thinking about Brazil, Chile, Uruguay, Argentina. Their voices have been amplified. We need to regain our status even within our own group of the G77. But we're always sensitive to group dynamics. And if you put too many things to the group, they feel a bit, you know, like they're being presumed upon, you know, like, whoa, you know, it's just.
So can I just add to that very quickly? I think we have an advantage here in that we have already a whole global movement behind us, lobbying behind the first 6. You know, we have numbers because we have NCD Alliance and all of we've got class working with us on those 6. So if we choose the additional 2, cervical cancer and the resilient health systems, then those are very unique to our setting and they speak to us, but we have the other 6 that we've got global support behind.
I agree with that, Maisha, and just to add that certainly from the climate change resilience point, the other small island states, the Pacific and stuff like that, will, I'm sure, be supportive of that. So that would not be something that we would have to fight for on our own. We would, you know, it would resonate with some other, in terms of the strategic partnerships that you have to create. So that would be something that would be something that's not limited just to CARICOM. In fact, that's something that would resonate with some other countries. And we could put our, you know, when we're speaking, we speak from our own experience, but the issue is there for the Pacific to put their spin for, you know, the different countries. And even in Asia, stuff like that, they have serious problems in terms of the monsoons and all of those things.
I would like to add to that I think what makes us stronger, if we could find a balance or a line between what I heard earlier, and that is the finance element, the politics, read the governance we create around NCDs, but also back it up with real science. But that's when we get the attention from the global community. If we can align and find the balance between finance, the politics, the governance behind it, and backed up by science. So I think the additional points from the CARICOM, if we could find out those elements which give a real balance between those 3 elements, I think it will add up to the list in a perfect way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I've been told I can't be seen behind the post.
I don't know, I don't have the experience with these processes, but I have a question as to whether or not we should also be thinking about what are the priorities of our heads that we're trying to convince to go to this meeting when we come up with these priorities as well. Because at least from my point of view, from health, they've made it clear. I don't know if you can scroll down this a bit, but really the concern, even before the hurricanes, tended to be around sustainability of systems, the economics of accessibility, and health security or health emergency response. At that time, it was related to Ebola or whatever, post-disaster. Those are the two things that keep coming up from the level of the heads, whereas from the level of the ministers of health, we get a much broader range. I just thought I'd bring that.
So while I'm not asking for it to be included if we're cutting, I think it's important for us to focus a bit on the improving accountability for progress, results, and resources. Because if we want for us to effectively have health financing, if we need to do health financing in a manner that's effective and efficient, then we need to have a health information system that is reliable, irrespective of whether that system is electronic or if that system is paper-based. Our ability for us to strengthen post-disaster health response requires us to know how many persons have chronic diseases in the countries that have been hit, where they are, and who we're accessing. The discussion on putting more money into NCDs is if we give more money, are the interventions that are being developed, the interventions that are being proposed, are they effective? So our ability for us to monitor and to evaluate and to respond on the effectiveness of what it is that we've done, maybe in the next 3 years or in the next 4 years or at the fourth meeting, is going to be dependent on us having strong health systems, health information systems.
Okay, any other comments before we wrap up?
Just to mention, I mean, when you look at the last one, making the Caribbean as a smoke-free zone, you may, well, we're doing something multilaterally, so it's every single country in the world, right? Don't think it's inappropriate to try and get the Caribbean in a document like that. Go for it. I just co-facilitated a multilateral negotiation on financing for development. That meeting is going on now. The outcome document was just adopted 10 minutes ago. We had language in there about the severity of the 2017 Atlantic hurricane season and what it is doing with respect to the budgets of countries in the region. We had language in there about correspondent banking. We had for Caribbean countries, we had language in there about small island developing states. So even in documents like this that is supposed to be applicable for every country, go for your region, try and get something on the sub-region in there. Don't be bashful about it. Push for it, because there's precedent for a thing like this to be specific about certain regions and sub-regions.
It's just a very quick comment. I hope the financing element will remain somehow. And if it remains, I think we just have to look at the wording of it. We are not financing NCDs. We are financing NCD responses, or we are financing NCD prevention and control. I think because these things tend to move on into the global terminology. Let's be careful. And this, we worked a lot on this for the Copenhagen conference, so I'm pretty experienced with this terminology. Thank you.
My comment is not directly related to the last panel, but the diabetes panel earlier on with regards to the prevalence of diabetes as it relates to the age group. We have seen that the 20 to 65 or 20 to 79 age group is more specific generally, but with the children or childhood diabetes, we have different age ranges. And what I notice is there is a gap between the 18 and the 20 years. So I'm not sure who can answer that question or who can deal with it. But for childhood diabetes, we do not have a specific age group. There is a gap.
Yes, some of the cross-cutting things could be framed as guiding principles, accountability, people-centered. That could be guiding principles. In the preamble, I'm hoping that we could have a more, the language could be around framing it, that declaring that this is an epidemic, no longer a challenge of epidemic proportions, and we have the data to support that. To give some urgency to it. So we'll treat it as an epidemic or how we'll treat an outbreak. So in public health sphere, we see that as an epidemic. I'm just processing what's there because I'm thinking, okay, if I was a minister of finance or agriculture or a head of state where I have security issues, do I see, can I tap into this? I think we mentioned earlier on framing, looking at the security issue related to some of what we're doing, linking that back to security, which is a big problem in the Caribbean.
Okay. So thank you. That closes my session. What we'll do is we will send, Kurt, can you just go to the last slide? We'll send an update of the statement shortly for everyone to feedback. Nicole has also prepared a briefing for us for the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, which we've gotten wide feedback from. So thank you for those who provided feedback. What we will do now is incorporate the priorities into that briefing so that they know what our priorities are, and then we will disseminate it. We've also asked a few other specific people for feedback. But once we finalize that document, we will share. If there's anyone in particular who wants to work with us on this campaign, I've put it as a last kind of bullet, possibly establish a core group to work together from now up until the high level meeting to really ensure that we're maximizing opportunities and we're plugged into meetings and we're plugged into what Ambassador Rattray is doing and making sure that we are really doing the best that we can. Please reach out to us and we will form a core group that will perform that function. And I'm going to hand over to Kay now, who's going to do our wrap up.